Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Sheldon Higdon. Sheldon's work has appeared in publications such as Horror Library, Volume 8, In Darkness, Delight, Fear the Future, Rue Morgue Magazine, Tales from the Lake, Volume 4, the Portland Monthly Magazine, Writers on Writing, Volume 4, and Madhouse, among others. He is also an award-winning screenwriter. Sheldon has an MFA in writing popular fiction from Seton Hill University and is a member of the Horror Writers Association and the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. His contemporary horror fantasy middle grade novel, The Eerie Brothers and the Witches of Autumn, was released in September 2023, just a couple months ago, from Scary Dairy Press. Sheldon lives in Pittsburgh with his wife and children. Welcome, Sheldon. Please tell us a little more about yourself and your new novel, The Eerie Brothers and the Witches of Autumn.
Hi. A bit about myself. As you mentioned, a dad, husband, writer, book collector, toy collector. Um, One-time background artist in films. I did extra work in 3 or 4 films. Some with screen time, so it's nice to see your face on the TV once in a while. But other than that, yeah, all around writer, I guess. Um, and the Eerie Brothers and the Witches of Autumn is my first novel, and my first attempt at middle grade novel or any kids work, I guess you could say. Um, Other than before that, it was just all adult oriented stuff, thrillers, some thrillers, mostly suspense. I guess you can say some of the horror stuff, but I don't really consider myself a horror writer. Um, I just write stories that are dark. Um, I probably would lean towards a more suspense, I guess, if I had to label myself, which I try not to because I just want to write everything and anything I can. But other than that, the book came out September 4th, and it's been getting really good reviews, and it's been doing really well. So I'm happy for that.
Okay, that's great. I'll let you know we did buy a copy for the library, and it has gone out just this weekend. It's
Hmm.
not no longer next to the flyer for your for this program. Um, what can you share? Can you tell us something about the book that isn't in the blurb?
It's hard. The heart of it is about learning who you are within your family, within your friends, within your world. And it's about relying on those who love you the most, and that we can't always do things alone. We always need help from other people, no matter what stage of life we're in, especially kids. And it's okay to ask for that help or seek help, and that we're never alone in anything. Um, and that's probably what its heart is. Its heart is really about family and friends, and how that's really the strongest spell that there ever has been.
So you mentioned in the intro that you haven't really written for younger audiences prior to this. So why? Why did you choose to write this book for a middle grade reader?
Um, Twofold, really. One being that I have twins myself, and the Erie Brothers, the name the Erie Brothers, I've always had in my head. Um, but then when I had twins, after a year or two, when they're about a year or two older, um, I started wondering. I started considering them the Erie Brothers, and I started wondering what they're going to do and what kind of adventures they're going to have and stuff like that. And then so it grew from there, really. Um, Plus, like I don't. Whenever I sit down to write anything, I don't go, "Well, this is going to be an adult thriller slash science fiction book." It's what comes to me dictates what it will be. And sometimes you go, "Ooh, that's a cool idea," and you think about it as an adult story, and then but it's just not. It doesn't work. There's something about it, and then you sort of go, "Well, that'd be kind of cool if it was a middle grade book," and then it starts to come together a lot better. So it usually tells me what it wants to be, and then I go from there.
So I guess this one told you, with the Erie Brothers, and since you had that up there,
Yeah.
and why Erie Brothers?
I, I don't it because part of my intention too was to write a horror version of the Hardy Boys.
Oh,
And so
okay.
that was my initial intention, was to do something of of that vein, I guess. And I thought, well, if you have twins, what would they be called? And I kept on, and then when I came across the Ear Brothers, which, like I said, I had it because um, I was talking with a friend of mine. We were talking about direct film directors, and I started saying, yeah, a lot of these horror films are made by brothers. There's whatever brothers, this brothers and that. So it'd be kind of cool if you had brothers and they were called the Erie Brothers. They made horror films. And I said, oh, that's kind of cool. And after a while, when I started thinking, the book started coming to me, and I started thinking, well, it would be my version of the Hardy Boys horror version. I said, okay, well, they'd be the Erie Brothers. And then, my kids came along, were born. And then a couple years later, I started sort of putting all that together for them, really.
And will the Erie Brothers have more adventures?
That's the idea. I mean, on the spine of this book, there's a number one at the top, show you that it's book one. I've always had it in my head as a cycle, not a series, because each one revolves around a season. And the seasons are cyclical, they're always a cycle. So, in my head, there are four books altogether, one representing each season. So yeah, this one being autumn, next one being winter, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Um, and you've written, as we mentioned, horror, suspense, thriller, fantasy. So is there one genre that you prefer to write in?
Um, no, really, I mean, I could write somebody said, "Can you write me a Christmas story?" There would be some darkness to it. You know what I mean? So no matter what it is, there would be some darkness to it. It's just what's in me. And that's been there since I was a kid. So no, I don't really write to a genre. I just write what the story is. Again, like a couple of years ago, I wrote a story that was a dystopian science fiction, dark science fiction story that came out. But I had the story already written well before it ever found a home in an anthology, you know. So a lot of times I just write short stories, and then when I find a home for them, I send them out, and hopefully they'll get published or whatnot, accepted. I rarely ever like look at a call for stories for something and then write a story for that. I do that once in a great while, but I usually just write stories and then hope they find homes later on. So I don't really, sometimes the story might tell me it's a thriller western, or it might tell me it's a horror romance or whatever it's going to be, and I just write it. Now, if I want to write something that I've never written before, like say a western novel, um, then I would read a lot of western novels just to sort of do research, on that genre, so I can better understand it, since I don't know a lot about that.
And since you've done screenwriting, do do the stories play out in your head like like a screenplay? Like, is that how they kind of come to being, kind of?
Yeah, well, it's just yeah, it's always been that way. Um, So when I write, I usually listen. I have headphones on and I listen to music. I don't know why. It's just the way it works for me. I can't go to a coffee shop and sit there and just no headphones or nothing. That would be the that side of it would be too distracting for me. So if I put headphones on and I listen to music, then I can get lost in the story, and I no longer hear the music. I see the story, and I'm within that world. Um, and so, yeah, it does play out like a movie to me a lot of times. And then if I want to work on a scene that I know I need to write, but I'm not sure how to do it, I'll replay that scene in my head in various ways while I'm laying in bed at night, sort of like a motion picture, and just see which way works out the best for me. And then the next day I'll write that and see if it works out on paper. So yeah, it's very visual. And there's times where if I'm writing and somebody comes in the room, I don't know they're there because I'm so removed from this world and I'm in that world.
Okay. Um, So what do you think makes a good story?
Honesty, you know, being true to what the story is, what its heart is. Um, if you can be truthful and have an honest story, whether it doesn't matter the genre, and it doesn't matter if the whole thing is completely made up, but you want to have that honest, you want that truth running through the middle of it, because there's always a heart of every story, whether it's a horror story or not. Um, and usually the best stories have that heart in it. Even the horror films, there's like a through line, what they call in screenwriting or in Hollywood. There's a through line that keeps the whole thing together. It's that one thread, if you will, that's makes that it's a great story. Now, of course, you can mention, well, you need good characters, you need all that stuff, plot, and that. Yeah, that's true. But you can have a shell of a story, but if there's nothing inside of it, then it's just an empty story.
True. Very true. Um, so what are you working on now?
I have a full length screenplay treatment that I just sent out to somebody in California. I'm waiting to hear back on that, and then I've started my next book, which is a young adult book about a 17-year-old girl. So, and after that, depending on how well the Erie Brothers does, will dictate whether I write book two or not. So,
Okay. Um, so I did a little reading, a little research on your website and on the internet. And in previous interviews, you mentioned that your mom inspired you to start writing. How so?
well, she was a writer herself, really. She would write songs, and then she would play those songs out on weekends at places and sing. She was a singer too. Um, she wrote poems. She almost got hired by, well, she was offered a position at Carlton Cards in Cleveland, which is like a Hallmark kind of card kind of thing. Um, so she wrote a lot. She just didn't write fiction like I do. So, and that's where it came from. And then she liked horror films. She liked playing pranks. She liked scaring people. And so all that together kind of sort of, oozed into me. And then, as a young kid, she gave me, her Stephen King books and all that stuff too. So, and I used to watch a lot of horror stuff as a kid because I was a latchkey kid. So, I was, home on weekends by myself watching, old VHS tapes of horror films and 80s movies and stuff like that. So, and I would stay up and watch Twilight Zone. I would stay up and watch horror films on the weekends where they're hosted by like, every city had one of those shows at night where they would have a horror host and then they would show horror films. And I grew up in outside of Cleveland. They had these two guys called Big Chuck and Little John, and then they would show horror films on Saturday nights after the news, and I'd stay up and watch that. And so then I had, old horror comic books that I had, reprints of the Tales from the Crypt, all that stuff. So it was just always there. And plus, when I was born just under 3 pounds, had a hole in my heart, collapsed lung. I was, from what I understand, I was pronounced dead 3 times. So I was, I tend to think that the darkness, sort of the darker side of things, and even death itself, I guess, has sort of been in me all along. I was born from it, born out of it. And so, for me, when, if somebody's like, well, why do you write horror? It's just who I am, or scary stuff or darker stuff. That doesn't mean I don't end on happy notes and things like that. I do. But the reality, there is darkness even when there's light. So, just the way the life is. So that's just part of who I am.
Okay. Well, okay. That's incredible story. um, what would you say? How would you describe your author voice? And would you say it plays out in all of your writing, or do you feel it changes between genres or age? Um,
Um, that's the funny thing, author voice. It's something that I never give any attention to. Or style. I just sort of do what I do. But other people told me, "Oh, I like your style, I like your voice," and to this day, I can't tell you what that is. I know everybody else sees it more than I do because I'm too close to it. Um, but I don't, whenever I write, no matter whether it's this book for kids or if it's something older, I don't change how I write to that group of people or to that age group. You're just going to omit certain things because it's written for, 14-year-old kids or 8-year-old kids or whatever. You're not going to put a lot of stuff in there that you would for adults. You might tone down the scare factor maybe a little bit. Um, but other than that, when it comes just to writing and style and voice, I don't try to alter anything. I just write to that group, but I keep in mind who I'm writing to.
And what would you say is the most difficult part of writing for you?
Probably, probably second guessing myself the whole time. Um, I rewrite stuff as I write stuff. If I write a paragraph and I don't like it, I rewrite it again. If I don't like the way the sentence, opens up, I rewrite the sentence. Um, and I need to kind of stop doing that. But um, I'm not happy until I feel like the story it's gotten good legs underneath it to get going. You know, so like that's probably for me the hardest part is to have something that I think is interesting enough to open the story, without like having people close the book or not want to go along to the second page or whatever. But second guessing myself is a big part for me when it comes to writing.
And like how long on average does it take you to write a book, or how long did it take you to write this book?
Um, this one, it went from idea to publication was 10 years. And that's because I wrote it, and then there was one point where had to rewrite the first half, like the entire first half, and I went back and rewrote it because I didn't feel like it fit with the second part. I thought the second part was better than the first part. Um, Also because during that time, I had twins, and then I have a daughter as well. And so you're raising them, and then I had 3 back surgeries during all that time, all that stuff. So life sort of slowed me down, but writing it in general, I could, like, the new book, I'll have it done within, probably ready to go out by March, and that's after the holidays and stuff like that. So I'll write it in 3 or 4 months and then edit it for another month and then have somebody else read it and then go back, fix edits, and then send it out. So I don't know, I guess 6 months probably. And I'm hoping I can get quicker and get, more work done in like 3 months.
And do you have a writing routine?
Um, no, I used to. I used to think, well, I better sit down and this is what I got to do. Now I don't go by word count. I used to. I used to go, okay, I got to write 1,000 words a day. Now I go by, okay, I have 4 hours today. How much can I get done in 4 hours? I have 6 hours tomorrow or 8 hours Saturday, and then how much can I get done in that time? Um, so I just write till the time's up, and then I'm good for the day. And any words is better than no words. So, and they're not going to be great words the first time I write it down either. So
You mentioned that you listen to music when you write. Anything in particular?
usually, metal or old school punk, and a lot of movie soundtracks. They help me sort of get in the mood for a certain scene or certain vibe of whatever I'm writing. So I'll pull out like soundtrack to Poltergeist, or one of the Stephen King's movies or The Exorcist or something. Omen. Um, and then Beautiful Mind is another one I like listening to. um, but metal, when it comes to music, it's usually like hard, like Slayer or somebody like that.
Okay. Um, so switching topics a little bit, publishing. What was your publishing journey, and what was the first story you had published?
So I've had some stuff in the early 2000s, published like in small local Pittsburgh papers, a couple websites that are defunct, no longer around. Um, but it wasn't until 2008 that I actually sold something for pay. The couple of years prior to that, it was always, hey, we'll publish it. We can't pay you, but I'm like, okay, that's how it works in the beginning. You just want to get something out there. But it wasn't until 2008 that I submitted to a paying magazine, and then they accepted my story within like the hour. And then I sent another one later that day, and it was accepted. So I thought, okay, I guess I got to start submitting some more stuff out there. And so I had all the stuff that I kept because I just kept everything for myself. Um, but I was always writing well before that, before I ever, submitted stuff to magazines or anthologies or anything like that. I've been writing since I was a little kid. So, but it just, growing up, I didn't have that information. I didn't have somebody there to say, hey, here's, if you want to get your stuff published, here's what you need to do, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I just had to figure it out on my own, and then I started meeting other writers and started talking to other writers, and then they sort of, help you out. And so I started submitting. So it's only been, 15 years. So
And for your first book, how how did you get it published?
I did some research on various publishers, and I submitted it, and out of the ones that submitted it to, this one came back with an offer, and I said, okay, that works. So, and then after reading contract, and I had the contract read by some other people, um, and then it was good to go. I mean, I just submitted it. Really, I just did some research on various publishers and came across this one.
And is this your first published novel? Like,
Novel, yeah. So
novel?
yeah,
Okay.
novel, yes, yeah. Everything else that was published was, nonfiction articles or essays or poetry or short stories, things like that.
Into the Scary Dairy Press. Be honest, that's the first I've ever heard of them. But
Yeah,
where are they located?
Virginia.
Okay.
So
I
yeah,
love the name. Scary Dairy.
yeah, I like it too.
Um, so what was one of the most surprising things that you learned when publishing this book?
The amount of time, because I think it was from signing the contract to now, I think it was a 2 year period. You
Oh,
know,
okay.
so yeah, so the amount of time, and then going through you know edits, and then going through the inner layout, make sure they sent me everything to make sure that I was happy with everything. So that was a good thing on my part, having them like that. They didn't have to, but they did, which is great. Same thing with the artist for the cover. They got the artist, and then they are like, okay, what, you got any ideas for the cover? And I said, well, I got these three ideas, and then I sent them to back, and then the artist liked the one that's on the cover now, and then he sort of took the idea and ran with his own version of it, which is great. So yeah,
Did,
the time, it's just, like I said, 2 years. I wasn't expecting. I thought it'd be like a year or something, but that's just the way it is, and I'm glad because it just made the book that much better. So rather, as Gail Ann Hurd, producer of um, Terminator and all these other films, she said, I'd rather have it right than right now. So, and that was my thinking when we were going through this. I was like, I don't, if it's 2 years, I'm fine. I'd rather have it right than right now. So,
okay, that is good. True. I mean, a better product is better, is to put out in the market, a better
hmm
reflection of the work. Um, do you have critique partners, or you mentioned being a member of the horror writers, um, or or do you? How do you feel about like joining writers groups or having critique partners? Has it been a benefit for you?
in the past, yeah, I haven't been a part of one in probably 15 years, maybe longer, probably 20 years. I used to go to one in our local Barnes and Noble all the time. Um, but I used to get a little bit of frustrated. I mean, I liked it a lot, but then it was one of those things where everybody would say, well, here's what I think, that needs to be fixed and all this kind of stuff. And I'm always the person who wants to know what needs to be fixed rather than being heard what you like about it. It's nice to hear what they like about it, but I just want to know what needs to be fixed so I can make it better. But then everybody would have something different, 100% different thing to say. And I'm like, okay, well, that's okay. That's not really helping me. Now I got to figure out if all these need to be fixed, or maybe they don't need to be fixed because it's just a personal opinion. So I always felt there's too many hands, in the kitchen sink, if you will. And so You know, if 8 out of 10 people said the same thing, then I knew that that needed to be fixed because majority says, you know, oh, this needs to be fixed. But it wasn't like that a lot. So eventually I just stopped doing it. Well, plus the group sort of dissipated anyways. But I haven't been back to one since then. Besides when I went to Seton Hill, we used to have critique classes and stuff. We'd have to go over everybody's work and stuff like that. Um, but it's a good thing, especially if you're new and you're writing. I mean, it's good to sort of build up your skin, you know, to get it thick so you know, that you can not take things personal. You know, it's all for the story, the betterment of the story. Everybody's there to really help you. Um, you know, I was once told that when you join a writers group, make sure that, you know, everybody is better than you because that way you can learn from those who've been there, done that, and who are better than you. And you can, you know, now you have something to aspire to get better at rather than being one of the best people and you're not going to learn much.
Mm.
Um, and so, you know, I always thought that was okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But now I just send out my work to, I have a few readers who will read it and give me their feedback and stuff. And they're honest and open and truthful, which is how I like it. So, and then, you know, I'll edit it a few times and then go from there, you know. But yeah, I think everybody should at least experience um, some sort of a writer's group just to, you know, like I said, build, you know, picking up their skin a little bit just so you can, because, you know, when you put your stuff out there that you've worked on a long time, you know, you're putting yourself out there.
Mhm.
And some people aren't ready for that, you know, some people are. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's a good experience just so you can walk away and now you know you can battle, you know, what may come in the future. You know, you might get negative reviews on your work, you know, can't take it personal. You might get rejected by an agent, you can't take it personal. You might get rejected by a publisher, you can't take it personal, you know. So it's all to build up their thick skin for those moments, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing.
Um, so kind of, kind of dovetails into what advice would you give a new writer that's just starting out?
I always go back to pretty much what, you know, Stephen King says all the time, read and write. Um, some people, you know, think that, well, if I'm going to read, then I'm just going to read because I love, you know, if I love science fiction, then I'm just going to read science fiction, you know, because that's what I want to write. Well, no, you should read horror, you should read romance, you should read, you know, dystopian science fiction, you should read, you know, urban fantasy, high fantasy, you know, whatever. And read anything and everything you can read because it all helps you in the end. Even autobiographies and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be fiction all the time. Um, but you know, if you don't read, then it's like I said, Stephen King says, then you don't have the tools to write because that's where you learn a lot of these tools. Is where you pick up a lot of things. That's where you pick up tropes, you know, in certain genres. How you know certain tropes in horror or science fiction or fantasy or whatever. If you read everything, someday you're today a lot of books are mixed genres.
Mhm.
It's, you know, back in the day, it was just, you know, here's your science fiction, here's your horror. Now it's all mixed. You have science fiction horror, you have, you know, romance westerns or whatever. Um, and so if you read everything, then you're gonna learn about the various genres. So if you get an agent, they might go, hey, you think you can, you know, in the next 3 months you could write a, you know, urban fantasy, you know, romance set in space, you know, some science fiction thrown in there. You're like, yeah, because you read it all, so you sort of know the tropes, you know the conventions of each genre, and you can write it. If you don't, you go, well, I only know westerns. Well, they're not going to come to you because you don't know how to write all that stuff. So they need, you know, so you
Mhm.
want to be well rounded. You want to know all the genres because that's what's selling. That's what's in the books today. No, you know, and there's no reason to limit yourself. You want to write um, as much as you can. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, you should write every day." It's probably true when it comes down to it, but you know, you're allowed to not write for a day. You're allowed to not read for a day. You're allowed to take a break and just get your mind together. Take a day for yourself. You know, the only person who's pressuring you is really you. So, if you feel like, oh, I got to write, 1,000 words a day, I got to write 1,000 words a day. And if you don't, then you get upset with yourself. And there's no reason to be upset with yourself. You're doing something you want to do and that you love. So take a day for yourself, go do something completely different, and maybe ideas will come to you while you're doing that. And then, go back to it the next day. But you do want to write a lot. You want to write as much as you can, but it's okay if you're not doing every single moment of every single day too. Even sometimes I just sit down with paper pencil and just free write, just off the top of my head, and then sometimes that gives me an idea for something else.
Okay. Those are all good things for new writers to keep in mind. Um, so I usually try to end with a fun question. And for you, do you have a favorite line from a book? It could be from one of your books or one of your favorite authors.
Uh, Man, I know. I One thing I always tell people when they ask me, well, like what's one of your like favorite stories, and I always throw, Shirley Jackson out there, Haunting of Hill House. The novel and the opening paragraph, that's like one of my favorite paragraphs. The opening of that book, because it sets up the book so nicely and it's written so well, and it just sets the tone of the book. That's like one of my all-time favorite stories. So I always point people to that because it's not a bad thing. Even as a new writer, young writer, it's something that I always tell they should read. Um, as well as the whole book in general, because there are some scenes in there that are pretty awesome. Um, but for a favorite line, I don't know. I've never really thought of that before, like what my favorite line would be. Um, yeah, that's one.
Yes.
I don't think, because there's so many books out there. Like I when I think of anything, I usually think of the whole book, because like The Last Man on Earth, by Richard Matheson. It's like, the image in the story itself comes to me rather than one line. And it's funny because whenever I read a lot of my books, I underline words or sentences, or I'll mark off a whole paragraph. So I do underline like really cool lines, you know, or dialogue or whatever, but I can never remember. I might have to go through all my books.
That's okay. And you had mentioned the Shirley Jackson, which was the book that you mentioned.
The Haunting of Hill House.
Okay. I'll take
Yeah, it's yeah. Well, she's one of my favorite writers in general. I mean, reading The Lottery as a kid, I remember reading it to this day. And I wrote my dystopian science fiction story I wrote a couple years ago was my sort of homage to that, because it's literally has a lottery happening within the story, and it's about the reduction of population and stuff. And so that was most sort of my homage to her when I wrote that. Just I did it more in a Running Man kind of way of doing it, Stephen King's Running Man, sort of way, I guess. I don't know, but people seem to enjoy it, so I'm glad I'm glad people like it.
Okay. Well, those are my questions for you. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us this evening, and wishing you all the best of luck with your middle grade novel, The Erie Brothers and the Witches of Autumn. And look forward to the winter one, and then I guess the spring and the summer to follow. And your YA novel, which you're working on now, and any other endeavors. Um, so best of luck, and thank you again for joining us this evening.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.